Mistake number 3 we've got listed here is creating a command and control culture.
Yep.
So you hire really smart people, you give them all the context, and then you just like micromanage them, right?
No, it's so crazy. And so here's a couple of really pragmatic tips for that, right?
Yeah.
So I always say, have an opinion, take a stand, and be right most of the time.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have to be right all the time because we make this shit up, right? And if you're wrong all the time, you're probably not the right person. But I could care less about your opinion unless you're willing to take a stand. So when somebody's like, management should have, whatever, right? There's 2 questions you want to ask, and the second one's more important. First of all, if you're in management, what decision would you make about this? Second of all, if you're in management, what information would you want to have to make the best decision? What information would you want to have to make the best decision for the business? And if you say that over and over and over again, then when the new person shows up and says, well, I have a couple of comments, then the other people are going to be like, well, you better have a solution because we're not really that big on comments. Problem finders, everybody can do that. Problem solvers. So back to you want to be a great place to be from. You want to have a reputation for being a person that jumps in and solves problems, period, end of story. So that's how you do it. You just look around, you see what needs to get done, and you figure out a way to do it. And that's the other side of context, right? Which is people really standing up and taking ownership. And they don't have to take ownership for the direction of the company. They need to take ownership for what it is they do. And if they have an opinion about how somebody else is screwing it up, they need to take ownership and go find out why.
I largely agree with everything you say. There's one slight nuance that I'd like to point out, which is that you want problem solvers and not just problem finders, but you don't want to create a context where someone who has noticed a problem doesn't escalate it, because sometimes you can't solve a problem yourself. And I think it's important that as part of actually taking responsibilities to say, I've noticed this really severe issue and there is somebody in the company who needs to know that. As soon as possible. And I'm going to escalate it fearlessly.
Yeah,
right?
no, but it's the same thing. It's like, okay, what would you do? I don't know. I really don't know how to solve this. And in fact, I don't even know who would. When I was at Netflix, that was probably 50% of my job was to go, I know who you should talk to. Here's the person that you should talk to. I don't know if they're the person that's responsible for solving the problem, but they know a lot about it. So they can bring you up to speed into where we're at. And here's a great other Netflix story I love. We hired this guy pretty far into the business. He was a data scientist, and we had just started hiring people like that. He was very, 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 very introverted, right? Didn't say much, really geeky. We go to a meeting. He's a pretty senior person. It's the first time he's actually going to present, right? And he puts up here's the 5 things I think that are critically important based on the information I've seen that we need to work on. And we're all like, yeah, well, we've tried all that stuff before. We've tested all of it and it doesn't work. And he's like, I know you've tested all of it. I'm a data scientist. I've looked at all the tests and so you tested this one on this date at this time. Here are the demographics of the customer base then. And here's the difference in the customer base now. And I mean, it's like all of this stuff that we had tried before, it was the wrong place, wrong time. We didn't have the technology. It was like, oh my God, that whole year, all we did was kind of go, what else have we tried that didn't work that might work again, right? So I totally agree with you 100%. It's the ability to speak up, but it's the ability to speak up sometimes and go, I know it didn't work, but have we thought about trying it again? Or why it didn't work? Help me understand why it didn't work. So that curiosity is also a really, especially in startups, right? And if you're going to look for any intangible when you're hiring people in startups, you definitely don't want somebody who knows what they're doing in some ways. You know what I'm saying? I mean, you want somebody who's curious enough to go, wonder if we did that differently, if that would work. Instead of saying, well, when I was at Google, because God knows I've heard that.
But this is so meta for startups in general, right? It goes all the way back to when people say the idea doesn't matter. What they're really saying is the implementation really, really matters. You might have the same idea as someone else, and they may implement it so incredibly well, and you may implement it crap, and you go, well, that was a dumb idea. But no, it's the implementation detail. And this is true not just for the originating idea, but for every idea and thing you try all the way down the
Yeah.
stack, all the way through your journey. And so
Yeah,
I will
that's right.
always meet founders who say to me, oh, Chris, we tried that B2C thing and it just didn't work. And so we had to pivot to B2B. And I'm like, did you really try it? Did you implement it really well?
And did you pivot a quarter turn, a half turn, or did you turn yourself around and get really dizzy,
Right,
right?
right.
Because that's another one. I mean, so I hate management speak, but that's another one of those words. It's like, we pivoted. It's like, yeah, you realize you're just fucking wrong.
I took something slightly different from your story about that data scientist, which is, I guess, around courage or what's sometimes called psychological safety, a culture where people can speak up, can call bullshit, can say, sure, you did it, but you didn't do it very well in a room. And I think you talked in your book about fierce intellectual debate, I think might have been the phrase that you used. But this idea that the term psychological safety, unfortunately, has been abused so badly that it's become a bit meaningless. But if you look at the original work, the idea of psychological safety is that we feel free debating each other at an intellectual level because we trust each other at an interpersonal level. And so we can have that courage to take those risks.
It's the thing I miss most about working. I do. I mean, I miss it. I miss it. I pine for it. I pine for going into a meeting and being absolutely sure that I'm right. And I've got it all figured out. I'm going to make my case and I'm going to convince everybody and they're going to listen to me this time because I'm right. And I get proven wrong. And I love it.
Yeah.
Right? That somebody that I respect has listened to me and said, well, I don't think you thought about this, or have you? And I'm like, you're right. I love that. I love being proven wrong with a good intellectual debate, right? And how it moves. And again, as leaders, it's also really, really important to learn how to say you were wrong. So the humility in leadership, Reed was really good at this. I mean, it was one of his very best traits. He would say, hey, by the way, that decision I made, I was wrong. And here's what I knew when I made the decision. Here's the context by which I made the decision. And it turned out that I'm not the average customer. Leaders demonstrating that, this whole, you can't be what you can't see. If you're a leader, a manager, an individual, and you're not willing to walk the talk, then no one else will either. They got to see him.
And it all comes from the top, right? It all comes from the founder and the CEO, which is usually the same person at a startup.
Well, it comes from as many people as you can have it come from. So here's an example. One of the things that was frustrating after a while, and I don't mean to pick on you guys being from Uber and Google, because I certainly hired lots of people from Uber, but
go nuts.
One of the hardest things for me was reprogramming you. So
Yeah.
I would have people at a director level who would be like, well, who is it that I'm going to have to present my idea to in order to get approval, in order to execute? I'm like, oh, for God's sake, you've been here a week. Haven't you done anything yet? We hired you to do something, not to present it, right? So just get it done, right? People can't be what they can't see. The more you can demonstrate that, the more they can see. I was going to tell you the story of hire a new person. The new person comes in and says, there's somebody on my team that I don't think is working out, and I want to talk to you about saying goodbye. And I would say, you should talk to Kevin about that. Okay, I know Kevin, and, okay, but I want to talk to you because it's an HR thing and I want to get rid of him. I'm like, you should talk to Kevin about that. He's really good at this. He's learned a lot of lessons about it. He's another manager like you. And so when you create those, I call them lieutenants, right? So people said, oh, when you left Netflix, did the culture go to hell without you? I'm like, no.